replacement. There was a lot of people smoking weed and doing cocaine, and drugs were everywhere.
So if they're doing drugs like dope, it has trank in it, and eventually they're gonna nod out or they're gonna fall right to sleep hard,
Yeah, you got fucking wet hair.
I was homeless last summer, and I had got my shit together, going through another little homeless spell. But the key to all that shit is just drugs. And it started with them nut-ass pills. And when I started, man, I really had no idea the road that shit would take me down. Lost a lot to them drugs, a lot to them fucking pills. But not to blame it on that, I shouldn't have been trying to get high or whatever. But it started.
In the fog-soaked alleys of San Francisco's Tenderloin, a man slumps against a wall scarred with graffiti. His breathing shallow and uneven after a dose of fentanyl cut with xylazine, the so-called trank that's turning city streets into graveyard. Opioids aren't just statistics anymore. They're the thief in the night, stealing breath and promise, one soul at a time. Around 18% of homeless adults battle substance use disorders intertwined with mental illness, a cruel pairing that tightens its grip with every hit. Today, more than 770,000 Americans are homeless, and countless others live chained to addiction. Fentanyl, xylazine, heroin, meth. These aren't just drugs anymore, they've become coping tools, survival mechanisms for people who can't face a world that's forgotten them. This isn't a story about numbers or government programs, it's about lives unraveling in plain sight. In 2024 alone, over 112,000 Americans died from overdoses, the most ever recorded, with nearly 70% involving fentanyl. Now, xylazine is making things even deadlier. It's a veterinary tranquilizer, often mixed with opioids, so powerful that even naloxone can't bring victims back.
Xylazine was originally put into the supply to extend the euphoria and the high feeling for individuals consuming that dope. Nobody asked for this. Nobody knew that this was being adulterated into our supply.
This trank, blended like poison, rots human flesh and leaves gaping wounds that no antidote can heal. In cities like Philadelphia and Los Angeles, where roughly 40,000 unhoused people drift through the streets, this cocktail isn't mercy, it's slow torture. Health Affairs reports that xylazine now shows up in more than 1 in 10 fentanyl overdoses nationwide, pushing poisoning cases up 3.2% for every 10% rise in homelessness. In Seattle, rows of addict tents have appeared, where people shoot up in full view of passersby, their chances of recovery fading fast. Petty crime and street fights have become daily events. And our health system, overwhelmed and exhausted, is paying over $1 trillion a year for emergency care, addiction treatment, and crisis response. Are we quietly becoming a society that accepts despair as just another part of urban life?
So if they're doing drugs like dope, it has trank in it, you know, and eventually they're gonna nod out or they're gonna fall right to sleep hard, you know. And whatever position that you're in, you're gonna pretty much, you know, slump over, and it's not a good situation because you're gonna get robbed, and then your spine is gonna get messed up, and you're not gonna care because you're still gonna be on them drugs and it numbs you.
This opioid catastrophe isn't only a health emergency, it's a moral reckoning, a cycle of despair fueled by policy failure and public apathy. We've poured billions into harm reduction, handing out clean needles and Narcan like temporary fixes, saving lives but seldom changing them. Maybe it's time to admit that real compassion asks more of us, not just to keep people alive, but to help them truly live again. As we go deeper, we'll face the grim anatomy of these drugs, the bodies they destroy, the souls they drain, and, hopefully, the pathways to reclaiming human dignity. Because in the silence of these long haunted nights, one question lingers. How many more ghosts must walk our sidewalks before we, as a nation, decide to heal?
Juvenile placement. There's a lot of people smoking weed and doing cocaine, and drugs were everywhere. And at some point, I don't remember if I got curious or I just didn't care or thought it'd be cool or what, but at some point I decided to try it.
Now let's dig into what really drives people this far. What twists once gentle faces, those unfinished dreams, into shadows of raw suffering? What pulls them right to the edge between life and death? On nearly every corner, beneath tattered tents held together for one more night, you see the same haunting scene repeat itself. Empty eyes, scattered needles, and whispered names fading into the dark. That's the drugs. Those dangerous friends that greet the lost and the broken when there's nothing left to lose. First come the opioids, that powerful class of painkillers that once lived in medicine cabinets but now rule the streets. When doctors started cutting back on prescriptions, many turned to heroin. It was familiar, cheaper, easier to find. But these days, nearly every batch is laced with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid dozens of times stronger than heroin, where one tiny mistake in measuring can snuff out a life in seconds. Fentanyl doesn't care who you are. It claims the young and the old, the rich and the poor, those with roofs over their heads and those sleeping on cold sidewalks. Then there's heroin, still lingering as the budget option for many homeless users, not because it's safer, but because it's cheap and always close at hand. The real danger now is that it's almost never pure. Dealers mix it with fentanyl or whatever's around to stretch supply, turning every hit into a deadly guess. When someone thinks they're taking their usual dose, they might actually be shooting up a mix so strong it stops their heart. What used to feel familiar has become a fatal gamble, one that no one truly wins. Third, and maybe the most heartbreaking part of it all, is Xylazine, a veterinary sedative that's turning up more and more in the black market drug supply. It's not an opioid, which means naloxone, the go-to antidote for overdoses, often can't pull someone back when Xylazine's in the mix. Worse yet, it causes deep, rotting wounds that sometimes lead to amputations, adding to the already crushing stories we hear from the sidewalks and emergency rooms. Doctors and outreach workers are now facing strange, brutal injuries, tissue dying away without the usual signs of infection, clear markers of what they call new drugs, fresh hell. The spread of these substances through homeless communities isn't just a supply problem. It's the fallout of poverty, stigma, and a healthcare system that's barely holding together. Needle sharing, overcrowded safe spaces, and no access to regular medical care only worsen the damage, spreading infections, wounds, and death. In cities like Los Angeles and Philadelphia, fentanyl alone now plays a leading role in many deaths among the unhoused, exposing the deadly collision between the housing crisis and the opioid epidemic. What hits hardest is the bitter irony. The most advanced, high-potency drugs ever created are destroying those least equipped to survive them. So when we talk about fentanyl, heroin, or xylazine, we're not just naming chemicals. We're talking about human choices made under pressure, about loneliness that eats away at hope, and about our shared duty to one another. So let me ask, should our focus be on saving lives first, or on cracking down harder on supply? And maybe the tougher question, what are you willing to do today to help a neighbor who's barely hanging on? Two, the price of forgetting. Serious consequences. From a medical point of view, the number 80,000 overdose deaths each year isn't just a cold statistic. It's 80,000 unfinished stories, 80,000 lives that might have been saved if our healthcare and social systems hadn't failed so completely. Under the grip of fentanyl and xylazine, many users' bodies are literally breaking down. The wounds from xylazine don't just rot the flesh, they often lead to amputations. Fewer than half ever make it to a hospital, a grim reflection of how impossible it's become for so many to reach real care. Between 30 and 60% of homeless addicts also live with mental illness, trapped in a vicious loop of addiction, hallucinations, and isolation. For them, drugs aren't just about getting high, they're about escaping a reality too cruel to face sober. On the social and economic side, the damage cuts just as deep. Once busy streets in cities like Boston or Portland now feel hollowed out, as if entire neighborhoods are collapsing under the weight of despair. Crime is climbing, with petty thefts, fights, and chaos turning into part of daily life. Our healthcare system is stretched beyond belief, spending more than $1 trillion a year on treatment, emergency response, and crisis care. But the real tragedy isn't measured in money. It's in the endless cycle that ties addiction to homelessness, spinning people through the same pain over and over again until there's nothing left to forget. Those most vulnerable are always the ones who slip through the cracks, the ones least seen, least heard. Among them, the elderly stand out in tragic numbers. For people over 65, fentanyl deaths have soared by nearly 90% in just the past few years. Many were once workers, veterans, grandparents, people who built this country in quiet ways. Now, too many fade away alone, swallowed by the cold night air and the sharp chemical smell that clings to forgotten streets. Children bear the pain in another way. They grow up in homes fractured by addiction, watching the people they love unravel. What can a child hold on to when home is nothing more than a dented car parked by the roadside? When the lullaby that sends them to sleep is their mother's desperate cries after another hit? None of this is just the result of drugs alone. It's the bitter harvest of neglect, failed policies, and a community too tired to care. These people weren't born to die on the sidewalk. They were left behind, slowly, quietly, by a society that stopped paying attention. And if we're willing to look closer, we'll see the truth. These tragedies are only the surface scars of wounds that run far deeper. know what's truly heartbreaking? Most of these folks never really had a chance. Addiction among the homeless isn't born out of moral weakness, it's born out of survival. When housing costs soar, when jobs vanish, when the rent takes more than a person could ever earn, what's left to hold on to? In cities like Los Angeles or Philadelphia, where rent devours nearly every dollar, cheap fentanyl on the street, $5 a hit, becomes an escape, a fragile kind of peace. People don't choose fentanyl because they want to die. They choose it because, for a brief moment, it dulls the pain of being alive. But this crisis runs deeper than money. It's rooted in wounds that no paycheck can heal. Many of these men and women carry years of trauma, abuse, grief, mental illness that were never treated, never even acknowledged. The system simply wasn't there when they needed it most. Only about 39% of U.S. pharmacies even offer buprenorphine, one of the few medications proven to help people break free from opioids. How can recovery ever begin when treatment is out of reach? And let's not forget how this all started. Decades of aggressive marketing of painkillers that made dependency seem normal. Doctors handed out opioids like candy, and when the prescriptions ran dry, the street drugs filled the void. So here's the question we can't dodge. Did they fail, or did we? Did society turn away too soon, too easily? Every syringe on the sidewalk, every tent shivering in a cold alley is a reflection of that failure. The truth is painful, but it's ours to face. Until we deal with the roots, poverty, trauma, and a healthcare system on life support, this cycle will only grow deeper and the cost more unbearable. In recent years, America's response to the twin crises of homelessness and addiction has taken a sharp and deeply controversial turn. What was once seen as a humanitarian issue is now increasingly treated as a matter of law and order. On the 24th of July 2025, former President Donald Trump signed an executive order titled Ending Crime and Disorder on America's Streets. The order claimed that most people living on the streets are drug addicted, suffering from substance use disorders or mental illness, and it redirected federal support towards states and cities adopting tougher strategies, mandatory treatment, placement in supervised facilities, and a major pullback from Housing First programs, which had long focused on providing stable housing before tackling addiction or mental health issues. But that raises a hard question. Is this truly an act of compassion, or just a way to move the crisis out of public view? Civil rights groups and nonprofit advocates quickly sounded the alarm, warning that these new measures risk criminalizing poverty itself. The National Homelessness Law Center called the order a rollback of humane principles, one that shifts the focus from care to control. Likewise, the National Alliance to End Homelessness reported that funding from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, is being redirected. Instead of supporting harm reduction efforts such as safe injection sites and needle exchange programs, more money is now flowing toward treatment centers, surveillance initiatives, and laws that allow for involuntary commitment. The debate has become more than a policy dispute. It's a moral crossroads. Should the nation treat addiction as a crime to be punished or as a wound to be healed? And yet, for those living beneath bridges or in makeshift tents, trapped by fentanyl, heroin, or xylazine, forced treatment often feels less like help and more like punishment. Does mandating recovery truly honor a person's dignity, or does it simply wrap coercion in the language of care? Local governments remain sharply divided. In Austin, Texas, for instance, on the 21st of October 2025, state authorities cleared several large encampments, arrested repeat offenders, and seized drugs. But reports showed that few of the people displaced were offered consistent housing or treatment afterward, only temporary relocation that left many even more disoriented. So the question lingers, are we really cleaning up the streets or just sweeping human lives out of sight? Solutions can't just live on paper. They have to breathe in real life. They have to be rooted in compassion and courage, actions that reshape how we think about justice and public health. The first and most urgent step, in my view, is stable housing, not as a prize to be earned, but as a foundation to begin recovery. Programs like Housing First have shown that when people have a safe place to live, hospital visits drop, stability rises, and genuine treatment becomes possible. When housing is combined with medications for opioid use disorder MAUD, success rates climb even higher. Alongside that, we need to expand harm reduction efforts. Wider distribution of naloxone, more than 2.1 million prescriptions were filled through pharmacies in 2023, free naloxone vending machines in high-risk zones, and clean syringe exchanges. Saving a life today isn't the same as enabling addiction. It's giving someone the chance to live long enough to reach tomorrow. But policy has to keep up with reality. The rise of fentanyl, and now Xylazine, an animal tranquilizer that can't be reversed with naloxone and causes devastating tissue damage, has completely changed the landscape. We need more drug-checking services in shelters and outreach centers, real-time alerts about contaminated batches, and frontline workers trained to handle complex overdoses. Knowing what's circulating on the streets isn't just prevention, it's survival. And yes, we should have honest conversations about supervised consumption sites. They're controversial, but early results from places like Rhode Island show that they can reduce overdose deaths and connect people to care. The question is, can we move past stigma and give real solutions a chance to work? Financially and politically, the real question isn't, can we afford this? It's, do we have the courage to invest in life? Settlements from pharmaceutical companies and prevention funds have helped, and CDC data shows overdose deaths declined noticeably in 2024. But progress is fragile. One budget cut, one political shift, and the hard-won gains could vanish overnight. To truly save lives, government leaders will need to support policies that some call soft or too forgiving. But is compassion weakness? Or is it finally choosing humanity over punishment? Because every policy without compassion is just another statistic. But when compassion is joined by courage, data, and long-term commitment, that's when we finally stand a real chance to break the cycle between homelessness and addiction in America. Conclusion. As the shadows lengthen across America's streets, the opioid crisis, fueled by fentanyl's deadly grip and Xylazine's cruel scars, continues to leave more than 653,000 homeless men and women adrift. Nearly half are caught in the snare of illicit drugs, with meth now surpassing opioids in overall use, according to a recent UCSF study from February 2025. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? Last year alone, we lost 80,000 people to overdoses. The CDC reported this June that deaths from synthetic opioids dipped slightly, thanks in part to naloxone, that quiet, unsung hero saving lives in back alleys and ERs. Yet the cycle grinds on, trapping thousands in a vice of despair and isolation. Maybe it's time we face a hard truth. Harm reduction, as vital as it is, can feel like a bandage on a gaping wound. Shouldn't we, however uncomfortable it sounds, explore mandatory treatment and long-term recovery programs that could truly pull people back from the edge? After decades of watching this tragedy unfold, I believe it's time to invest billions in supportive housing and broad access to buprenorphine, not as charity, but as the only way to break this generational chain before more lives fade into the margins. Just imagine the lives we could reclaim if compassion and action finally walked hand in hand. What small step could you take today to light that path? Because in the end, doing nothing isn't just neglect, It's a quiet betrayal of our shared humanity.